The morning Clara Ashworth buried her mother, the landlord came for the house. She hadn't finished washing the dirt from her hands when she heard the knock. 3 hard raps, the kind that don't wait for an answer. She opened the door to find a man in a brown coat, holding a folded paper like it was something holy. Mortgage notice. Her mother had been borrowing against the house for 2 years. Medical bills, then more medical bills, then the kind of borrowing you do when you've run out of other options. Clara hadn't known. Her mother hadn't told her. The total came to $412, and the man in the brown coat needed it by the end of the month, or the property reverted to the lender. Clara looked at the paper, then at the house behind her. 23 years of her life inside those walls, and she'd need a miracle to keep any of it. She didn't have a miracle. She had $11 and a sewing kit. The postmaster in Millhaven, a small Ontario town that mostly existed because the railway had to stop somewhere, kept a board near the window where people tacked notices. Jobs wanted, goods for trade. The usual frontier commerce of people trying to get by. Clara had walked past that board 100 times without reading it. She read it now. The third notice from the top, handwritten on brown paper in letters that leaned like they were tired. Rancher seeks capable woman. Permanent position, room and board provided. Stony Creek Ranch, 12 miles north of Harwick. Inquire with Mrs. Fenn at the general store. Capable woman. Clara was 24 years old. She'd nursed her mother through 3 years of illness, managed the household accounts, bartered with creditors, and kept them fed on almost nothing. If that didn't qualify as capable, she wasn't sure what would. She inquired with Mrs. Fenn. Mrs. Fenn was a small woman with sharp eyes who looked Clara over the way you'd assess a horse at auction. Not unkindly, just thoroughly. "You're applying for the Callaway position," she said. "Not a question. If it's still open, it's always open." Mrs. Fenn folded her hands on the counter. "You should know what you're walking into before you say yes. Thomas Callaway lost his wife 18 months ago. He's got 2 kids, a boy and a girl, 9 years old. The ranch is a good one, or it was. He's been managing alone since Margaret died, and the place is showing it." She paused. "He's also not easy. I'm not looking for easy." Mrs. Fenn studied her for another moment. 3 women have taken that position in the past year and a half. All 3 left inside of 2 months. "Why? The children," Mrs. Fenn said. "Mostly." Clara thought about that. Then she thought about the mortgage notice sitting on her mother's kitchen table, and the $11 that wouldn't cover the first week of rent anywhere she'd want to live. "Tell me how to get there," she said. The ride north to Harwick took half a day on the mail coach, then another 2 hours by hired wagon along a road that was more suggestion than fact. The driver dropped her at the entrance to a long gravel lane and pointed toward a cluster of buildings at the far end. He didn't offer to take her closer. Clara walked the lane with her bag over one shoulder and tried to prepare herself for whatever came next. The ranch revealed itself slowly. First, the fences, cedar rails running out in both directions, some of them solid and some of them leaning. Then the outbuildings, a hay barn with a weathered roof, a smaller equipment shed, a smokehouse that looked newer than everything else. Then the house itself, 2 stories, timber-framed, with a covered porch that ran the full width of the front. Big windows, a stone chimney. Good bones, her mother would have said. Neglected bones, Clara thought. A dog barked from somewhere. Chickens scattered as she came through the gate. She was halfway to the porch when the front door opened. Thomas Callaway was taller than she'd expected, broad through the shoulders, with dark hair going gray at the temples and a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in several days. He wore a work shirt with the sleeves rolled up and looked at her the way a man looks at a problem he hasn't figured out yet. "Miss Ashworth," he said. "Mr. Callaway." He didn't move to help her with her bag, didn't invite her in, just stood in the doorway and looked at her. "Mrs. Fenn send you?" "Yes, you know what the position is. Housekeeping, cooking, help with the children." "The children," he repeated, and something shifted in his expression. Not quite a warning. More like a wound he'd learned to work around. "They're not easy right now." Mrs. Fenn mentioned, "I'm not saying it to discourage you. I'm saying it because the last woman who took this job didn't believe me when I said it, and she left after 3 weeks. The one before her lasted 6. He stepped back from the doorway. "Come in and see the house, then decide." The house was worse than the outside. Not dirty, exactly. More like someone had stopped caring whether things were in their right places and let entropy take over. Boots in the parlor. Dishes stacked but not washed. A good braided rug gone gray from tracked in mud. The kitchen was functional but grim, and the cold storage smelled like something had been left too long. Clara walked through each room and kept her face neutral. "The children's rooms are upstairs," Thomas said from behind her. "Mine's at the end of the hall. Your room would be the one off the kitchen. It's small." She looked at it. A narrow bed, a window that faced east, a hook on the back of the door. Small was accurate. "It's fine," she said. "The pay is room and board and $2 a week. There's a garden behind the house that needs work. I've got 12 men on the property and they feed themselves, so it's just the family you'd be cooking for." He stopped. "3 with you." Clara turned to face him. Up close she could see how tired he was. Not the ordinary tired of hard work, but the kind that had settled in his bones and wasn't going anywhere. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "I'd like to meet the children before I decide." He didn't answer immediately. Then he went to the foot of the stairs and called up, "Owen, Nora, come down, silence. Now please." Feet on the stairs, slow and reluctant. 2 children appeared in the hallway, a boy and a girl, small for 9, with their father's dark hair and eyes that had seen too much for their age. The boy hung back. The girl came forward and looked at Clara like she was something that needed to be assessed and dismissed as quickly as possible. "This is Miss Ashworth," Thomas said. "She's going to be helping around the house." "We don't need help," the girl said. Her voice was flat and certain. "Nora, we've managed fine." Thomas exhaled through his nose. "Go back upstairs." The girl Nora kept her eyes on Clara for 3 more seconds, making sure her point had landed. Then she turned and went back up the stairs without hurrying. The boy Owen followed without ever quite meeting Clara's eyes. Thomas looked at the empty staircase, then at Clara. "Like I said, I'll take the position," Clara said. He blinked. "You don't want more time to think about it? I've thought about it." She set her bag down by the kitchen door. "When do you need me to start?" He looked at her like he was trying to figure out if she was brave or foolish. "Maybe both." "You can start now," he said finally. "I'll show you where things are." She started with the kitchen, because that's where she could do the most visible good in the least amount of time. By evening she'd scoured the cold storage, reorganized the shelves, set a pot of bean soup on the stove, and made bread that would be ready by morning. The house didn't look different yet, but it smelled different, like something was happening. Thomas came in from the fields at dusk and stopped in the kitchen doorway. "You didn't have to cook tonight," he said. "I was already here." Clara ladled soup into bowls. "The children eat with you? When I can get them to." He washed his hands at the pump and sat down. "Nora usually takes something upstairs." "Not tonight." Clara set 3 more bowls on the table. He looked at her. "You're going to have to be the one to tell her that." "I know." She went to the foot of the stairs and called up, "Supper's ready. I'd like you both to come down." Silence. "I made soup and there's fresh bread. I'm only asking once." More silence. Then slowly, feet on the stairs. Nora appeared first, eyes cold. Owen behind her, curious despite himself. They sat. Clara put bread on the table and filled their bowls and didn't make anything of it. No fuss about whether they'd come or nearly hadn't. Just soup and bread and the sound of spoons. Owen ate everything in his bowl and looked at the pot. "There's more," Clara said. He looked at his father, who nodded. Owen got up and helped himself, which told Clara something about both of them. The boy was hungry and the man was too quiet. Nora ate half her bowl and stared at the table. "You're going to leave," Nora said, still looking at the table. "They all leave." "Maybe," Clara said. "But I'm here tonight." Nora looked up at that. Something flickered in her face that wasn't quite hostility and wasn't quite hope. Then she went back to her soup. The days that followed were hard in the way honest work is hard. Clara was up before dawn every morning, banking the fires, starting breakfast, checking the larder against what the day would need. The house pushed back at every turn. A pipe that dripped in the pantry, hinges on the cellar door that had swollen and stuck, a kitchen window with a broken latch that let in cold air all through the night. She fixed what she could and made a list of what she couldn't. Thomas barely spoke to her beyond necessity. He was out by first light and rarely back before dark, and when he came in he ate quietly and went to bed. Clara didn't take it personally. She'd grown up with a man like that, her father, before he died. Some men had their feelings buried so deep they'd forgotten the way down. The children were another matter. Owen was easier. He'd started appearing in the kitchen in the mornings, not talking, just sitting at the table while Clara worked, occasionally asking a question about what she was making or why she did something a certain way. She answered without making a production of it. Within a week he was helping without being asked, carrying wood, filling the water pot, setting the table for meals. Nora watched all of this from a careful distance and trusted none of it. On the 5th day, Clara found her mother's recipe book in the top kitchen cupboard, wedged behind a tin of baking powder, like someone had put it there to keep it out of sight. She took it down and held it for a moment. The handwriting inside was round and careful, nothing like the cramped notations Clara's own mother had left in her cookbook. Someone had loved this book. She put it back where she'd found it. On the 7th day, Nora locked the pantry and said she'd lost the key. Clara looked at the locked door, then at Nora, who stood nearby with her arms crossed and her chin up. "All right," Clara said. "I'll need to go to the general store in town for flour then. Is there anything else you'd like me to pick up while I'm there?" Nora blinked. She'd expected a different reaction. "I'm not joking about the key," she said. I know you're not. Clara picked up her coat. Tell your father I'll be back by noon. She was back by 11. The pantry was unlocked when she returned, the key sitting on the counter like it had been there all along. Clara put the flour away and didn't mention any of it. That evening, Nora appeared in the kitchen doorway while Clara was rolling out pastry. How'd you know I'd unlock it? I didn't, Clara said. I bought flour in case you didn't. Nora came into the kitchen and sat at the table. She watched Clara's hands for a while. What are you making? Apple tart. There were apples in the cellar going soft, seemed a waste to let them go. Nora was quiet. Then, Mama used to make that, did she? Clara kept her hands moving. What did she put in it? Cinnamon. And a little bit of lemon, I think. I've got cinnamon. Clara reached for it. I'm out of lemons, but I've got dried lemon peel. It's not the same, but it's close. Nora watched the cinnamon go in. Her face was complicated in the way children's faces get when something makes them feel two things at once. It won't taste the same, she said. Probably not, Clara agreed. Things usually don't, the second time around. Nora didn't answer, but she stayed in the kitchen while the tart baked, and when it came out of the oven she asked for a piece without being offered one first. It was 3 weeks in when Clara found the problem. She'd been trying to make sense of the household accounts since her first week, partly because it was her job to manage the stores and partly because something felt off. Not obviously wrong, just slightly misaligned, like a door that's hung a quarter-inch crooked. Enough to notice, if you paid attention. She went looking for the ranch ledgers. Thomas kept them in a wooden box in the parlor, and he hadn't said they were private, so she opened it one evening, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet. The books went back 4 years, 2 of them in one hand and 2 in another. The earlier ones, neat and methodical, were Margaret's. The later ones were Thomas's, and the difference told a story. Not of bad management, exactly. More of a man who was keeping up with everything except the underlying pattern. Clara spread the pages out on the parlor table and went through them slowly. Stony Creek Ranch ran cattle, some timber on the north quarter, and a few acres of hay for winter feed. On paper, the numbers worked, but over the past year, the actual numbers had been coming up short in ways that were small enough to look like normal variation. A count of steers that came up 4 head light, a hay delivery that arrived 2 tons underweight, a timber payment that somehow processed at a lower rate than the contract specified. Individually, each one could be explained away. A bad count, a scale error, a clerical mistake. Together, they added up to over $300 in losses across 12 months, and the pattern was not random. Every significant shortfall happened during the weeks when Thomas was working the northern timber section, and the cattle operation was managed by his foreman. His foreman, a man named Douglas Peel, who'd been with the ranch for 6 years, and whom Thomas trusted without question. Clara sat with that for a long time before she closed the books. She wasn't certain, she might be wrong. $300 wasn't nothing, but it also wasn't proof of anything more than bad luck and sloppy record-keeping. She needed to be sure before she said anything, because accusing a man's trusted foreman of theft was not a small thing, and she was new here, and she knew exactly how much that counted against her. So she kept watching, and she kept her mouth shut, and she started keeping her own parallel records on a blank sheet tucked inside the back cover of the household accounts book. It took another 2 weeks, and a hay delivery she happened to witness in person. The order was for 8 tons. She saw the wagon pull in, saw Douglas Peel sign the receipt, watched the load get stacked in the barn. That evening, she went out with a measuring string and calculated the volume. 6.5 tons at most. She did it twice. She found Thomas in the stable that night checking a mare with a sore foot. I need to show you something, she said. He looked up. Whatever he saw on her face made him straighten. The ledgers, she said. I've been going through them. I think you have a problem. She laid it out for him at the kitchen table, the numbers and her parallel records and the hay delivery, everything precise and documented. He sat across from her and read through it twice without saying a word. His jaw got tighter with each page. Douglas Peel, he said finally. I could be wrong, you're not. He pushed the ledger back across the table. I've wondered. Last spring there was a cattle count that didn't sit right, but I had 3 other things going wrong at the same time and I let it go. He rubbed the back of his neck. I let it go because he's been here 6 years and I didn't want to think it. Do you want to deal with this? He looked at her. What do you mean deal with it? I mean, do you want to catch him properly, with proof that holds up, or do you want to confront him and let him walk away? Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Properly, he said. Then I need you to let me keep tracking the numbers, and I need you to not change anything that would tip him off. Keep acting normal. That's my job, he said, and she heard something in it that wasn't quite a question. It's whatever you want it to be, Claire said. You can take over from here. I just found it. He looked at her across the table. You found it, he said. Keep going. Something shifted between them in that moment. Not dramatic, not named. More like a door that had been slightly ajar moving open another inch. She kept going. The worst of it came in November. A cold front swept down from the north and settled over the whole region like something that had decided to stay. The temperature dropped hard and fast. Thomas had 60 head of cattle grazing on the western range that needed to be moved to the lower pastures before the real snow came. He went with 8 of his men, leaving Douglas Peel in charge at the home ranch and Clara with the children. She didn't like it. She'd told Thomas she didn't like it, and he'd said Douglas had given him no reason for open suspicion yet, and moving the cattle couldn't wait. He was right on both counts, but she still stood on the porch and watched them ride out with the cold wind pulling her hair loose, and a feeling she couldn't quite name sitting heavy in her chest. The first 2 days were fine. The third day, Owen came down to breakfast looking pale and ate nothing. By noon, he was running a fever. Clara had seen her mother through 3 winters of illness. She knew fever. She also knew that Owen's fever by nightfall was not the ordinary kind, the kind that breaks with sleep and fluids and a day in bed. It climbed fast and burned hot, and by the time she'd got him settled, and his blankets changed twice, she could hear the wet sound in his breathing that she didn't want to hear. Nora stood in the doorway of Owen's room with her arms wrapped around herself. "He's going to be all right," she said. The same thing she always said. "Is he?" Nora's voice was very quiet. "I'm going to make sure of it." They worked through the night together, the 2 of them, Clara cooling his fever with cloths and getting water into him, and Nora sitting by his bed and talking to him in a low voice about nothing in particular, just sound, just presence. Around 3 in the morning, Nora fell asleep in the chair and Clara covered her with a blanket and kept watch alone. By morning, Owen was worse. He needed medicine. Real medicine, not home remedies, not cool cloths and willow bark tea. The nearest doctor was in Harwick, 12 miles south on roads that were already treacherous from overnight ice. Thomas was somewhere north of the property line with no way to reach him. She woke Nora. "I need you to sit with your brother and keep him drinking. Can you do that?" Nora looked at Owen, looked at Clara. "You're going somewhere." "I'm going for the doctor." "The roads are iced. Papa wouldn't want you to." "I know." Clara was already pulling on her coat. "I'll be as fast as I can. You watch him. Don't let him stop drinking. If he seems worse, you go out and get Jake from the bunkhouse. He's the oldest of the hands. He'll know what to do." "What if something happens to you?" Clara looked at the girl, 9 years old with her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness, and a fear so old it had already worn grooves in her. "Then Jake brings the doctor anyway," Clara said. "Either way, Owen gets help." She took Thomas's steadiest horse, a gray gelding named Birch who'd been over bad roads before, and she rode south into a morning that was white with cold and stingy with light. The road was worse than she'd expected, glazed with ice in the low spots, and drifted across in others. And twice Birch had to pick his way carefully around places where the footing disappeared entirely. Clara kept her hands light on the reins and let him choose his path. It took nearly 4 hours to reach Harwick. The doctor, a man named Andrew Finch who'd been practicing in the territory for 20 years, looked at her wind-burned face and shaking hands and said, "You rode in from Callaway's in this weather?" "His son is sick. I think it's pneumonia." Finch looked out his window at the road, then at Clara. Then he went to get his bag. They rode back faster than Clara had come, Finch knowing the road better and pushing harder than she would have dared alone. He didn't complain. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. He just rode. Owen was still conscious when they arrived, barely. Finch examined him quickly, confirmed pneumonia, administered what he had in his bag, and gave Clara detailed instructions for the days ahead. The fever needed to break in the next 24 hours, or he'd need to be moved to town where Finch could watch him closely. Clara nodded and memorized everything, and started the next round of treatment before Finch had finished packing his bag. Thomas came back the following evening, a day ahead of schedule, because one of the hands had found a way to get word up to him. Clara heard the horses in the yard and went to the door. He came inside and went straight upstairs. She heard him in Owen's room, his voice low, and she stayed in the kitchen and made tea and waited. He came down 20 minutes later. He stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment before he said anything. "How long were you with him, since it started?" 3 days. Alone, Nora helped. He looked like that hit him somewhere soft. "You rode to Harwick. He needed the doctor. The roads were." He stopped. "Started again. You could have sent one of the men. The men didn't know what I knew about what he needed. It was faster if I went." Thomas crossed the kitchen and sat down heavily in the chair at the end of the table. He put his hands flat on the surface and looked at them for a moment. "I keep coming home to find out about things after the fact," he said. "Things I should have been here for. You were where you needed to be. My son was sick, and now he's going to be fine," Clara said. Because the work you were doing kept this ranch from losing 60 head to the cold, and because I was here and I went to get help. That's how it worked out. He looked at her. Something in his face that she hadn't seen before, or maybe had seen and not let herself notice. Why did you come here, he said. To Stony Creek. I've been wondering. I told Mrs. Fenn I needed a position. That's not what I mean. He was quiet for a moment. The women who came before, none of them lasted. I knew when I hired them they probably wouldn't. I kept hiring anyway because there was no other option, but I didn't. He stopped. I didn't expect someone to stay. I stay when there's a reason to, and is there one? It wasn't quite a question. Clara poured tea and set a cup in front of him. Drink this, she said. You've been out in the cold for 3 days. He drank. The silence between them was a different kind than the silences at the beginning, not closed off, but full. Upstairs she could hear Owen coughing. Controlled, less rattled than yesterday, getting better. Thomas said, the foreman. Peel, yes. You have enough to go to the magistrate? I have enough to make a very clear case. She sat down across from him. I want to show you one more thing first. I think he's been selling short weight on the hay deliveries and pocketing the difference from the supplier. I need one more delivery to confirm it, but I'm nearly certain. Thomas looked at her across the table with an expression she was starting to recognize. Not surprised exactly, more like a man who'd stopped expecting things and was getting used to being wrong about that. All right, he said. We wait for the next delivery, then we go to the magistrate together. The delivery came 2 weeks later. Clara was in the yard when the wagon pulled in, as if by accident. She had her measuring string and she knew exactly what she was doing. The hay went in the barn and Douglas Peel signed the receipt, and when everyone had moved on, Clara went in with her string and measured twice. The order had been for 10 tons. She measured 6 3/4. She brought the number to Thomas that evening with her written record of every previous discrepancy and a tally sheet showing the total losses across 14 months, $431. Thomas looked at the sheet for a long time. Come with me tomorrow, he said. They rode into Harwick together the next morning, Clara with her ledger and her records, and the careful notes she'd made, and Thomas with the kind of quiet certainty she'd come to understand was his version of fury. The magistrate, a deliberate man named William Stroud who'd heard most things twice, listened to all of it without interruption. He asked Clara 3 questions, all precise, all about the methodology of her record. She answered all 3 clearly. Stroud looked at Thomas. Your hired hand? 6 years, Thomas said. I trusted him. People generally trust longest the ones who intend to take the most advantage of it. Stroud folded his hands. I'll have a constable ride out to your property today. You'll need to be there. They rode back along the same road they'd come, not speaking much, the cold air sharp and the sky a flat gray that promised more weather. About halfway home, Thomas said, I've been doing the numbers wrong. Clara glanced at him. I knew something wasn't adding up. I could feel it. But I told myself I was just bad at the books, that Margaret had always been the one who understood the numbers and I never had. He looked at the road ahead. I was using it as an excuse not to look. Because looking meant admitting the ranch was in trouble, and I wasn't ready to do that on top of everything else. You were ready to do a lot of other things, Clara said. That's different. Physical things I can manage. Numbers meant sitting down and being still and thinking, and I wasn't. He stopped. After Margaret, I wasn't any good at being still. Being still meant feeling things. Clara was quiet for a moment. What was she like? He didn't answer right away. The horses walked on, and the trees thinned at the side of the road, and somewhere off to the east a crow called once and went silent. Steady, he said finally. She was the steadiest person I've ever known, not loud about it, just solid, the way some people can walk into a room and everything settles. He paused. The children got it from her. Even when they're being difficult, even when Nora's making everyone miserable, she's so certain. That's Margaret. Clara thought about Nora, who'd sat with her brother through 3 nights of fever without being asked, who'd unlocked the pantry and left the key on the counter and never mentioned it. She's doing all right, Clara said. I know. That's partly you. That's entirely her. He looked at her sideways. A brief look, but direct. You do that, he said. Do what? Give the credit away. Clara didn't answer because the ranch was coming into view at the end of the lane, and because she wasn't sure what to say to that, and because some things were better let alone until you understood them better. The constable arrived that afternoon. Douglas Peel, confronted with Clara's documented records, said very little. He was a practical man, apparently, and practical men knew when a case was already made against them. He was taken back to Harwick for processing, and by evening the ranch was quieter than it had been in months. Owen was well enough to come downstairs for supper that night, thin and pale but himself again, and he sat at the table and ate 2 full bowls of the potato soup Clara had made, and said it was the best thing he'd tasted in his entire life. which she thought was the fever talking but accepted graciously. Nora sat across from him and watched him eat with an expression that was so purely relieved that she looked, for a moment, exactly like a child. After supper, she came to find Clara in the kitchen. "I'm sorry about the pantry," she said. "Which time?" Nora almost smiled. Almost. "The key time. It's fine. I was trying to make you leave." "I know, it didn't work." "No," Clara agreed. Nora leaned against the counter and picked at a thread on her sleeve. "The other women always left," she said. "Even when we weren't mean to them. Even the one who was nice. She just left. And every time someone left, it felt like..." She stopped. "Like losing her again," Clara said quietly. Nora's chin went up, which was her version of not crying. "Yeah, I'm not going anywhere, Nora." "You might. People say that. I'm saying it." Clara met the girl's eyes. "I came here because I had nowhere else. And then I stayed because..." She paused, honest with herself, honest with this child who deserved honesty. "Because this felt like somewhere worth staying. That's new for me. I'm not walking away from something new." Nora looked at her for a long moment. Then she pushed off the counter and went toward the door. Stopped. "I've been thinking," she said, not turning around, "that if you ever wanted to stay permanently, past the hired position part..." A pause. "Owen and I would be fine with that." She left before Clara could respond. Clara stood in the quiet kitchen and felt something settle in her chest that she hadn't felt in a very long time. Or maybe had never felt quite this specifically. Like something lost had been found again in a different shape. The trial happened in January, in the county seat 2 hours east. Clara testified for 40 minutes in a courtroom that smelled like wood smoke and old paper, and she answered every question put to her by Douglas Peel's defense counsel, in the same clear and precise way she'd answered everything else. The defense tried to suggest that a woman managing ranch books was inherently unreliable, and the magistrate cut that line short with a look that suggested he had no patience for that particular argument. The jury took 2 hours to come back. Peel was found guilty on 7 counts of fraud. He was sentenced to 14 months and ordered to make restitution. Thomas was waiting outside the courtroom when she came out. He'd been in there for the testimony and left just after, and she'd wondered why. Now she could see it. He needed air. He needed a moment that wasn't inside 4 walls where someone had spent an hour carefully proving that the man he'd trusted for 6 years had been stealing from him the whole time. She stood beside him on the courthouse steps and didn't say anything. After a while he said, "Thank you. I told you I'd see it through. I know." He was quiet again. A wagon went by on the street below them, the horse's breath making clouds in the cold. "Clara," she waited. "I'm not good at saying things directly," he said. "Margaret used to say I had all my words buried somewhere underground and I'd get to them eventually if you were patient enough. I'm patient." He looked at her then, and she let herself look back. And the thing that had been building for months between them was right there in the open, where neither of them could pretend not to see it. "I don't want you to stay because of the position," he said. "I want you to stay because you want to be there, because it's yours too. Not legally, not officially, but..." He stopped. "Because Stony Creek is a better place with you in it, and I'd like it to keep being that way, for the rest of the way." Clara looked at this quiet, tired, honest man who'd trusted her with his ledgers and his children, and without quite meaning to, with himself. She thought about her mother's kitchen and the mortgage notice and the board in the Millhaven postmaster's office and everything that had led her down that long gravel lane to a house with good bones and neglected ones. "All right," she said. It was not a dramatic declaration. It was the kind of answer that 2 practical people gave each other when they'd both done enough surviving to know that the quieter things lasted longer. He took her hand, left it at that. They rode home in the early afternoon, arriving just as the light was going golden on the snow. The children were watching from the porch, Owen bundled in his coat, Nora with her arms crossed in her usual posture of waiting to see what the world was going to do next. Thomas helped Clara down from the horse and then looked up at his daughter. Nora looked from him to Clara. Her expression did the complicated thing, the one that held 2 feelings at once, and then she uncrossed her arms. "Supper's on," she said. "I made it myself." "Owen helped. Is it edible?" Clara asked. "Probably." She climbed the porch steps, and the children moved apart to let her through the front door, which was its own kind of welcome, and the house was warm and smelled like the soup Nora had made with more confidence than skill, and it was exactly right. She stood in the doorway for a moment before she went in, looking at the snow-covered yard and the cedar rail fences and the outbuildings that still needed work, all of it winter quiet and solid in hers in the way that mattered. 6 months ago, she'd buried her mother and lost a house. She'd thought that was the end of something. She understood now that it had been the beginning.